be in a round table and I'd be listening to counsel talk. And I remember distinctly having with one of those lawyers that I like and that I trust, finished his presentation. And I said, okay, let me tell you what I just heard you say. I heard him say, God, I hate this part.
I feel it. I feel that.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Defense Never Rests. I am, of course, your host, Megan. And today I'm super excited to have on a longtime listener, Bob Walsh. He was one of the first people, I think, who subscribed to this podcast way back when we first started. But also, I've had the pleasure of working with Bob on cases for years, and I just think he's just a delightful person to talk to, and he's so knowledgeable about claims and really relationships and the importance of relationships in this industry, whether it be relationships with your counsel, relationships with your insureds, relationships within your firm, and just how developing and maintaining those relationships really helps this machine, well-oiled and, move forward. So, I was honored when I asked him to come on and he agreed to join me. So, he has so much to share. So with that, I'm going to bring him in. Good afternoon, Bob. Welcome to the Defense Never Rests. I'm so happy to have you.
I am so thrilled to be here.
I need our listeners to know this because I feel like you might be one of our very, very first subscribers to this podcast. I think you've been a long time listener.
I think that's probably true. I'm a podcast listener, and so when Trish started this whole project, I was on it pretty early and offering criticism fairly often. So,
did we listen to some of your criticism? I wasn't privy to your criticism. So if she made the changes, she didn't let me know they came from you, or the suggestions came from you.
How like her.
Well, I do appreciate your support and you tuning in for all these years. We've definitely changed. Things have changed since the start. I think it was great how it started, and we've pivoted a little bit. But I appreciate that, that you took the time to tune in and give us the support, especially at the beginning when you may have been one of like 3 people who probably tuned in.
You've kept it fresh over the time. Okay. So
I hope so.
It's been a good listen.
Well, we are not here to talk about just this, even though that's great. But, I am so happy that you joined us because you have been listening for so long, and we've been trying to get you onto the podcast. And finally, I think Trish twisted your arm just enough that you said, yes, sure, I'll join Megan for an episode now. But as you know, from listening to this, when I get guests on, one of the first things I like to find out is, how you kind of made the decision to get to be where you are now. And I say that because you went to law school and you decided to go to law school, and all of us lawyers out there have different reasons why we chose that path. And I love hearing the different stories from everybody of why they took the path that they did. So what was your, what pushed you to go to law school? Because I from your background was, kind of like mine. You had a biochem background, so you had some of the science stuff back in there. So that's not a typical law school precursor.
It's actually a funny story. So I went, as you said, I was at the University of North Carolina in the biochemistry department. I was there for a year. It was a wonderful opportunity. I learned a lot, got to publish a paper, which not a lot of, first year students get to do. But as that year rolled on, I began to think about what it was that I wanted to do and why it was that I was there. And it was an interesting situation because the professor that I worked for basically was there teaching nominally in order to do research, and I was doing research because I thought I wanted to teach. And we had many conversations about that tension between the two of us, and very productive conversations. And at the end of my first year, I decided that I really needed to go out and see what else was in the world in terms of sort of the service situation. And so I spent the next 4 years in New York City at a shelter for homeless kids, which is where I met my wife. And so we reached a point, we got married and reached a point where I realized that I needed to get an advanced degree that, and I had one of our bosses at the shelter was somebody who had been a lawyer and decided that he was not going to do that anymore, but really used his legal skills in terms of the way he administered the program. And so my choices, as it narrowed it down, was I could either go to law school or I could go to social work school. And I was sitting on the stoop in Jersey City in our apartment in Jersey City, looking out at the Manhattan skyline one night. And it struck me that my wife is a savant when it comes to social work. And that I didn't want to be the second best social worker in my family. And so I decided to go to law school.
So you could be the best lawyer in your family.
Well, hopefully that's true.
How did you find, that transition over to, how did that go for you? Going from, because it is a little different when you come, and I did the similar thing. Like I went to school for something totally different. I worked for some time and then went to law school. And when you enter law school, you kind of enter with a different maturity. I felt like I entered with a different maturity than some of my classmates because I'd already done other things. And I was like, it wasn't just a default move for me. It was like, no, like this isn't an extension of college. So I had a little bit of different mindset. Did you find that to be the same for you?
Yes. So I was a little bit older than my classmates. A lot of my classmates in law school were, had just come straight out of college, and I had, spent 5 years before I went to law school, and so that part was a little bit different. We had our first child by then. He used to run around campus, which was to the delight of some of my classmates, and it's not to the delight of others. So that part was different. And the pressures, we had different pressures, different sort of, I want to say our worldview was different, but, having a child and trying to make marriage work, at the very beginning, and going to law school at the same time was a lot. And so, but we weathered that storm pretty well. Now, I didn't have it, I had it hard, or I would like to think that I had it hard. But my wife, again, going back just to make the record clear, because I'm sure she's going to listen to this. My wife delivered our child between semesters of her MSW program at NYU. So I didn't have it nearly as hard as she did.
But she timed it really well by doing it in between semesters.
Yes. Well, she I guess she missed the first couple classes, and when she came into the class, one of the professors, Sheen, where you been? And she said, I had a baby, and she said, good excuse.
I guess I'll take that. That is an excused absence.
Yeah.
But during law school, and as you were like nearing graduation, did you have an idea of, what direction you wanted to go in? Or did you, like me, were kind of forced in a direction because that's what the economy at the time, at least for me, the economy at the time dictated what direction I was going to go in?
No is the answer to that question. I think that that I had the very good fortune of having a summer clerkship with a lawyer who had just come up from Washington, D.C. to open a branch practice for his plaintiff's law firm, and he knew nothing about Connecticut product liability law. The Connecticut had really just recently put the statute on the books. And so that first summer I spent really sort of learning the product liability law along with him. And so when I got my first job, one of the things that was worked to my advantage is that I really did know the Connecticut law pretty well. And one of the first cases I was assigned to was a lawsuit that the firm was defending against one of the diet programs. And I don't remember which one it was, but I remember the partner specifically calling me in and saying, "We're going to assign you to this case," and that, and he said, in part, he said, because there's a lot of science that goes on in this one. And he said, and I'm pretty sure that you're the only person who can read the papers intelligently. So, so the two things, the biochem background and having learned the products liability law really worked in my favor. And that was all she wrote, really, in a lot of ways. I mean, that's what I've been doing for the last, for my career.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up there too, because this is something that I find too. A lot of there's this misconception out there that like lawyers aren't good at math or aren't good at science, and I share that similar background, and I actually think it helps quite a bit because there's so much analytical thinking that goes into mathematics and science and all, those courses that you kind of already have this real logical basis mindset going in, and I think it does assist very well when you're trying to like pick apart claims, particularly products claims, when you already have an idea about how like electrical engineering might work, or physics or biochemistry, whatever maybe you have this background that someone who is a philosophy major might not have the same opportunity to pull out, or the same experiences to pull out of.
Well, I'm not going to badmouth philosophy majors, but but I would say that, and you and I talked about this a little bit earlier, that I think that when one of the things I'm looking for when in a lawyer and a products liability lawyer is somebody who's they're not quite an engineer, but they're pretty close. That they don't have difficulty with the concepts, because I mean, let's face it, that the two important parts is, number one is you have to understand the concepts in order to defend the case, but the other thing you need to be able to do is you need to be able to put it into language that a juror can understand. And so you're looking for a lawyer that really sort of is an amalgam of those different things. So especially on sort of the higher more complex types of products claims, I think that it's almost a necessity.
Yeah. And during your career doing in private practice, were you focused solely on products claims, or did you have like a wider berth of types of claims you're working on?
Everybody works on a little. When you're working for a big firm, everybody works on a little bit of everything. But I think my main focus was products. I had the great fortune to as a lawyer in private practice, as an associate, to work for one of the major automobile manufacturers and also for one of the major heavy equipment manufacturers. And so so those were very serious cases with insureds with clients that really understood what they were doing, and were very engaged in it. And even to the point where the auto manufacturer, one of the things I got to do in my second year was to go out to Detroit, and they ran a 7-day course for young lawyers who are going to defend them, so that we can learn exactly what a differential was, and and how an engine worked, and those sorts of things which, by the way, with all the the way that the advances have been, are probably useless now, but at the time it was pretty cool. That was probably 1989 and I got to watch them crash a 93 very high-end 93 model car into a fixed barrier at 30 miles an hour from about 30 feet away.
Yeah.
So that was cool,
but also really important.
Yes.
Like that hands-on, like approach to things, I think is so important. I've talked to people on this podcast before, like from someone who's director of claims of a restaurant, that even with the restaurant with their outside counsel, they want to bring their outside counsel in and they have them learn everything as if they're on the line, so they understand everything and how it works. So then when if they are to get, down the road, have litigation, get sued, then that attorney really understands how the business works. And I mean, the same goes for that. You really have to dive in and understand how the product works and, what can go wrong, or how it actually happens versus just reading it. It's just a different experience from when you're there in
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
You're in private practice for some time. What takes you, how do you eventually leave the grind of the private practice to now be like to go outside and be like, I no longer am billing those hours anymore, and now I'm on the outside now?
Quite frankly, I mean, there was the opportunity at the Hartford to take that subject matter expertise I had with respect to products cases and to sort of use it in a situation where I was now the one going to be hiring lawyers instead of the lawyer that was hired. It was a tremendous opportunity, and one I'm really thankful that I had.
When you came into the Hartford, was your role, because I know what your role is from our working relationship, but when you came in, was that this, did you come in being in a specialty program, or is that something that came about as you gained more experience?
Oh no, I was hired for this specialty program, and essentially, this was a program which was going to target as their clients insureds that had very, very few claims, but when they happened, they had the potential to be catastrophic.
Yeah.
And so, and not surprisingly, product manufacturers fell into that category. And so, at the very beginning, I was the home office consultant for that particular business, and I oversaw a group of field handlers that were actually doing the nuts and the bolts of the handling on the ground. And sort of as time progressed and the business grew, I had the opportunity to not only to be supervising those field handlers, but also we brought on had to bring in some other additional folks into the home office, and I ended up directing those folks in terms of their oversight of the field organizations in handling claims.
When you're in this program and you worked really closely with some of your insureds, or all of your insureds, I should say, right?
Yes.
Yes,
absolutely.
And from you and I speaking over the years and more recently, you put a lot of stock and time into developing relationships, and I feel like that really made your connections with each individual insured pretty strong.
Yeah, I agree. That's absolutely right. I think I've always started with sort of the premise that claims is the face of any insurance company, and in particular, for me, it was the Hartford. And so, the underwriting was important, and I had my group had very, very tight relationships and very close relationships with their underwriters, which, depending upon the company you're working for, can be pretty rare. But we worked well together in terms of understanding what our insureds were about, in terms of understanding what a prospective insured was about, and in terms of basically going out and selling our claims operation, or our claims group, as part of that sales process. It was not an unusual situation where we would actually meet an insured before they became an insured. And part of the reason why they would come on board was because of what we told them we wanted to do for them, or could do for them in terms of claims. And we really sort of ran the gamut. We had insureds that would not know a GL claim if they fell over it. And for those folks, we were basically, we acted in a lot of ways as their risk manager, so that when a claim did come in the door, we were able to sort of walk them through the process, and explain what needed to happen, what we were doing, why we were doing it. And then we had insureds on the other end who often would have a large self-insured retention, who would call me and say, Bob, we're involved in this claim, we've reported it, but it's well within it. So far we thought it was within our retention, now we think it's not. And what do you do? And we'd like to talk to you about it. And I think the important thing for those folks basically was the notion that I wasn't going to push the panic button, that I wasn't going to go out and settle a claim that they didn't necessarily want to settle, that I was going to listen to what it was that what their interests were and what their concerns were. And sometimes their concerns went beyond the claim that was sitting in front of us. Sometimes the claim involved a very important product of theirs that we needed to make sure was defended appropriately, because if there was a judgment against it, then there was a whole product line out there that was suspect. And one of the cool parts of my job basically was that I had a lot of autonomy, so that in the last year before I left, I had one particular insured who called and said, we've got this situation coming up, and I have to be in the same town as the CEO of the other company that's involved in this, and we're trying to figure out what the cost sharing should be, but we don't necessarily want to involve you. We want to let you know, and at that point, if it was somebody that you didn't know, if it was an insurer that you hadn't been working with for 10 or 15 years, you would say, you can't have that. But I knew these people. I knew what they were about. I knew that I knew they could be trusted. And I said, look, and so we sat down and we mapped out what the strategy was, and I was involved at that point, but I didn't go because they didn't want anybody to know that that insurance was going to be involved in this, and for good reasons. And so and that's the sort of relationships I think that that you can have, that a carrier can have, if they're willing to sort of take the leap, if they're willing to to be committed to not just their own bottom line, but to the bottom line of their clients.
And I think a lot of it goes to the notion of partnership and trust, right? And you get those things after you spend some time and you build the relationship together, and you can trust that insured, that individual, because you've both put the time and the energy in, and you kind of know what each other is about, so you can have those kind of honest conversations, and then be like, look, we this is kind of how we want to do it, because this is what works for our business. And you've developed the relationship long enough that okay, all right, we can do that, because you understand the business too, and you understand that what goes on behind the scenes, so to speak.
Correct. Yes.
And I mean, one thing you and I had talked about too is that same relationship thing extends to counsel. And I think you always prided yourself in, finding counsel that you trusted. And then once you found that counsel, that was the counsel you trusted. Like I'm good. I got, but
the people, I think I work people out a little bit in terms of continually repeating myself, and that we don't hire firms, we hire lawyers.
Mhm.
And that, like, as I said, the lawyers especially that I was looking for, were not, they are not your run of the mill guys. I mean, and I don't mean to badmouth, people in our profession. But I think that there are, there are folks that are subject matter experts, are sort of have that engineering sort of mindset. And those are the and that are trustworthy, that are not, so on the one hand, I had situations where we would be in a round table and I'd be listening to counsel talk. And I remember distinctly having with one of those lawyers that I like and that I trust, it finished his presentation, and I said, okay, I said, let me tell you what I just heard you say. And I swear to God, he said, I heard him say, God, I hate this part.
I feel him. I feel that.
Right. But the fact of the matter is that that's a two-way street, and so, I didn't ever want, one of our lawyers to basically tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. I wanted them to tell me what they believed to be the truth, and we could have, honest and hopefully fruitful conversations about those things.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, so it's number one, sort of being, number one, I was going to say subject matter expert. That's not right. That's number two. First thing is judgment, right? And that's the one thing that you look for, because that's the one thing that can't be taught. Somebody either has it or they don't. And so you're looking for attorneys, and by the way, this goes for claims handlers. This goes for your experts. It goes for for your investigators. You're looking for people who understand the situation and exercise good judgment. You're looking for people who are good subject, have good subject matter expertise, and then to the extent that's possible, you're looking for people who can have the same sort of relationships with the client that you have, and that you've developed. And the worst thing that the worst thing I think that I could do is to put one of my trusted or one of my valued insureds, in a situation with a lawyer, in a difficult situation with a lawyer that I had never used before, because of the jurisdiction or whatever. And those are situations where I felt like I needed to be there, because I needed to make sure that the insured was being taken care of. But there were also lawyers out there that that I didn't have that concern about, that I knew that they were trustworthy, that they exercised good judgment, and that they were going to be able to serve my insureds in the way that I would if I was in their shoes.
And I think a lot of that, though, goes to knowing your insured so well because you put in the time, but also knowing your counsel very well. And you might have you might have counsel that you love and you jive with, but Joe, CEO of X company, might not get along with Mary, and you might love Mary, but the two of them together might be oil and water. So, and you're the one who know, like you have the relationships with both, and you have to have that, again, like that judgment on, maybe Mary and Joe aren't a good fit. Maybe I need to find Brian.
Yeah, and by the way, sometimes you make a mistake and you put you put two people together that don't fit, and you have to be willing to listen to what each of them are saying as you progress. And at some point, if you've got to be willing to say, what, I made a mistake, and we're gonna bring another lawyer in, not because you're a bad lawyer, but because it's not working well. It's not working well with this client, and we need to make sure that at the end of the day, we're the insured is going to needs to be able to feel comfortable with the lawyer that's representing them. And so
Yeah.
you got to be willing to, it's like that's like anything else. You have to be willing, when you make a mistake, you got to be willing to own it and do the things that are necessary to fix it.
Yeah, own it, and then yes, and have a solution. But I mean, we see that a lot. I see it a lot at my end too. Like there could be attorneys in like my office that I work really well with, but someone else, like, it's just the working styles don't jive. Like, everyone just has their different ways of doing things, and or someone's, the way that someone else works up a case might not work the same way. You might have someone who's a products liability attorney and that they work up a case for that, but that same workup isn't going to work for a premises case, or may not, and you just it's like you have to gauge, like, is this a good fit for this type of claim? You have to look at everything that's involved in it, and it's not just a one-off approach.
Correct.
But having said that, having that experience with so many outside counsel, and seeing how certain people work with insureds and how they work up their files, are there any characteristics that stand out to you that is something that you really look for when you're selecting or choosing to develop a relationship with a particular attorney to work more with them on cases?
Well, like I said, number one is judgment, and that's, again, and that's always, dipping your toe in the water, because you don't know, the first time, you may, have recommendations from lawyers that you trust. But at the end of the day, it really is sort of, I mean, to the extent that it's possible, you kind of like to put those folks on the smaller cases just to see how they work, right? But like I said, but I think the three things I mentioned: judgment, some degree of subject matter expertise, and then also again, their willingness to speak the truth, to both and to have honest conversations, both with the carrier as well as the client.
Yeah. And, this is a theme that comes up a lot, though, and you touched on it before, is, you don't want to only hear what your attorneys think you want to hear, because that doesn't really help anything.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Like, I mean, and if you can hear up front, like, hey, Bob, this is not a good case for us. Like, we're looking at exposure. We probably should get ahead of this now. And maybe we can, here's our plan to minimize this exposure. But, this is just calling how it is, rather than like, oh yeah, slam dunk, we got this.
Right. No, and Oliver in your office has probably said that to me 2 or 3 times over the course of, the last 10 years. This is probably when we should get out of early. Or I've said it to him, Oliver, this is when we should get out of early. So,
yeah. And but I feel like that also goes to the trust factor. If you have an attorney you really trust, like, calling it how it is versus how they think you want to hear it, the trust is really, really there. And you have to, not be scared to deliver bad news.
Yeah,
it sucks to deliver bad news.
It does. There's one other thing which sort of this reminds me of, and that is that my best moment as a lawyer came during a case for that heavy equipment manufacturer, and I was sort of I was the associate on the file, and so I was sort of taking the less important depositions, we'll say. So it was a death case, and I was taking, so I ended up taking the deposition of the widow and a couple of the sons. And it was a case in which a gentleman had been killed while operating a piece of equipment in a particular manner that, he probably shouldn't. Well, not probably. He should not have been using it in the way that he was. And one of the and so and I don't remember, we'll just say the name of the company, it was a construction company. Obviously it was Smith and Sons.
Yeah.
So I got to take the deposition of the sons. And I was taking the deposition of the oldest son and, taking him through all the sorts of stuff. And I said, I asked him, I said, did you, this is how your father, this is the sequence where your father died. I said, did you ever see him operate the piece of equipment that way? And he said, yeah, I did. And I said, have you ever operated the piece of equipment that way? And he hesitated for a minute or a moment and said, yes, I have. And the hesitation just got to me. And I just said, have you operated this piece of equipment like that since your father died? And he said, yes, I have. Mm-hmm. This is a failure to warn case. And so I said, okay. And I ended the deposition and we settled this death case for less than 6 figures.
Yeah.
And so a great moment, like I said, my best moment as an attorney, probably though, one of the things that I spent a lot of time in my early years on the carrier side was trying to get my lawyers to find that silver bullet in every case that they had. And you know what? It's not there. and you can spend a lot of resources looking for that silver bullet. And sometimes it helps to just really sort of step back and say, you know what? The case is what it is. And might there be a silver bullet in there? Yes. But how much is it going to cost me to get there? And what's the opportunity cost in terms of, in terms of, getting the case resolved now for what I can get it resolved for versus, spending the ton of money, looking for something that might not be there. It took me a little while to sort of figure that out. Because that moment, great for me as a lawyer, but it kind of spoiled me for a little bit until I realized that, that silver bullet wasn't there all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to find it at every case, but
That's right.
But the mindset is good, to have that mindset that you're looking for. It's just, you shouldn't rely upon finding it.
Right. That's right.
And in your career and having, in your development of relationships with attorneys and insureds, but mostly attorneys, are there any factors that for you are relationship killers, like things that you don't feel like you can come back from?
It would seem to me that, the one of those things, again, it goes back to the notion of the importance of the relationship, and that to the extent that, a lawyer is dismissive of me or a claims handler that I'm overseeing. Yeah. I think that that's destructive to the relationship, and I think that we have, that once the first time that happens, you have a conversation about it. But if it happens again, I think that's the end of it. Because again, it goes back to sort of that trust issue. Yeah. And and while this isn't a killer, one of the things that just frosted me all the time was, we'd get on roundtables and we'd have lawyers who were clearly not prepared for the conversation, and not. I don't mean this to come off as blowing my own horn or anything like that, but there were not an insignificant number of roundtables where I would, over the years, where I would get off the call or the lawyer would leave the call and I would be talking to the claims adjuster and I would say, which part of you're on the line with the home office consultant did that person not understand? Right. And in part that goes to judgment, right? I mean, mm-hmm. Because, you have to, I think that you prepare to the level of, you should be preparing at least to the level of of your audience. And when you fail to do that, I think it's disrespectful. Again, and not because, I've many great shakes, but because I think that, that there's a gravitas that comes along with, with those two words. It's amazing how much in the carrier world, how much the word home office, brings to bear in any situation.
Well, it also is a little disrespectful of your,
Right.
of you and your time. You know, if you were to come unprepared, like, well, Bob set aside X amount of time for me to present this case and offer my recommendations, and coming in unprepared and not anticipating said questions, then you probably can't help but think, well, so then how prepared are they before the judge? Or how prepared are they for that deposition? Are they just winging that too? And then I think you can't help but start asking those questions in your mind, because, like let's face it, if you're the one who decided this attorney gets this case, and then when they're presenting said case to you and they're not ready to present it, you're like, yeah, but the judge didn't send in that case. And if they're not prepared to impress me, are they going to impress, what are they going to do? Impress the judge, or, take the deposition, or whatever it may be. So I 100% can see that. Like, why, it's kind of a slap in the face, to make it a little extreme, but
Okay, you can say that.
I did. Have you ever had a scenario though that, that was a game changer for you, that you're like, you know what, I don't know if I can continue on in this relationship?
I had a claims adjuster who was working for me, who was handling a case that wasn't one of mine, it was somebody else's. And they were at a mediation with this particular lawyer that we had used. And the lawyer was very critical of the whatever the strategy was that the claims adjuster was involved in. Again, I was not involved in this case at all, but the lawyer knew that the claims adjuster was associated with Hartford, and said, well, do you know Bob Walsh? And yes, I do. And says, well, apparently this wasn't run by him, because he would never have done it this way. That lawyer never worked for me again.
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt like he was using my name to get leverage over, an adjuster, again, not even on my case.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was completely inappropriate. And so when that firm became involved in our cases, at other times, I said, no, that we're not going to hire. We're only going to deal with this firm if this lawyer is not on the case.
Yeah. I can
So
understand
yes,
that.
it's the answer to your question, I think.
Now, and I've heard varying responses to this question. I've asked a number of people in your same position about young attorneys, like less experienced attorneys, and working on cases. What are you like? Do you have any strong feelings on that? Like I've talked to people like they do not want their files to be learning files, and I get that, because there could be some wheels turning, money wasted type things when you get greener counsel like working up files. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, we were all young attorneys at one point, right? We all needed to learn somehow. And I think that, you and Trish can't do all the work, right? So I think it's a matter of, number one, again, trusting the person, the partner, trusting your contact at the firm, that they're not going to assign somebody who's a bozo to your file, and that they are going to oversee the file in such a way as it's actually going to be a learning file as opposed to a dumping file.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that depends upon the trust that you have in in your contact, in the partner that's involved in the case. But the fact of the matter is that there are a number of times when that young attorney is somebody who has all those other things, qualities that you're looking for, that the only thing they're really missing is experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm happy to spend the resources there because, and I can think of it, one situation in particular where, I worked with the lawyer and with this associate who became a partner and then really took over our business once the original partner retired.
Yeah.
And so, you have to be able to, so you have to take the long view here. And that sort of takes us back to the whole, relationship issue, right? Is that the relationship is not necessarily, it's not a one-off situation, right? It's something which you're going to spend time with, that, you're going to, I have at least one insured that I had at the Hartford, and that I had call with the CEO of that company twice a year, whether we had cases or not, just to make sure, to touch base, to make sure that we understood, how their business was doing, that they understood how our business was doing, and I continue to have, that, even though I'm not with the Hartford at this point, I continue to have a relationship with that gentleman. It's not just a matter of, yes, we meet over these cases, but the fact of the matter is that that relationships have a lot more there is a lot more to them than just that.
Yes.
And so, so that's probably the most enjoyable part of the job for me, was sort of those, those relationships, understanding how those people worked, understanding what was important, and this comes as no surprise to you. I mean, we have one client that your firm worked with us on a number of their cases, and just an amazing, a small, family-owned business.
Mm-hmm.
They made a terrific product, and and the very first time that I went out and toured the plant, the thing that struck me more than anything else was the fact that the president of the company was able to talk to or refer to every single person on the line by their first
Mm-hmm.
name. And those are the kind of people that you're looking for to be your clients, and those are the kind of people that you want to have long-term relationships with, because they're going to teach you stuff.
Yeah.
It's not, they're going to teach you about how to acquire clients. They're going to teach you about, how do you continue to prosper? How do you continue to be successful? It's not just, it's not, that's a two-way street.
And I will say that particular client, I think, also wrote a handwritten thank you note to the attorney who handled some of those cases. That says a lot.
That would not surprise me in the least.
But I mean, I think that does say a lot too about, again, it was like our theme is relationships, and building them and curating them and trust in them. And to piggyback off what you said about young, growing young attorneys, like you trust, you said you hire attorneys, not firms, but so you trust that attorney to then hire also attorneys that fit kind of the type of qualities that you're looking for, and then mentor them and help them grow. So then you can trust that associate, and that, again, the partner who you've hired is overseeing the work. And so it doesn't work unless everyone trusts one another in the process.
Right. Because hopefully, if the system's working right, then it's all growing, right? And
right.
So the work is growing, and so you can't deal with that finite group of people. I mean, you have to, at some point, you have to sort of grow and develop the resources to continue to handle the growth.
Yeah.
And that includes the young counsel as well.
My point is that you can't. You do have to have a growth mentality to understand that you are better when you develop a team and you have a good team working with you and you trust the team and you grow your team, because if your tentacles are everywhere, you're not going to do a good job everywhere because you're just going to be stretched too thin. So you have to work on developing the right team and balance. And not to say that you hand it off and you have no idea what's going on, but you have to also understand, like, you literally cannot have your hands in everything, because then something is going to go amiss. So you need to trust who else is handling it.
You have to be able to delegate.
Yes. And it's a skill I'm learning too. I'm not great at it, but I'm working on it. I am a work in progress, and but I do think that's something you learn and you grow over time with as well.
I'm hoping.
See? One thing I wanted to touch on, though, because we've talked so much about relationships with clients and attorneys, but throughout your career, you've seen the likes of all different types of opposing counsel. And those relationships are important too. Sometimes very adverse and sometimes, not so, and sometimes more friendly. But, what are some, have you seen changes in the way that the plaintiff's bar kind of approaches cases that make it more challenging for you?
Well, I think, God, I'm going to use the word I kind of hate, but social inflation, right? And that, I mean, I think that, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I think we had a pretty good sense of how much a case, a death case was worth, and how much, an arm off case was worth. We had a pretty good sense of that. I think that we no longer have any sense of that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are a number of lawyers in the bar, and I'm thinking about a couple out in California in particular, who are really leveraging that, that notion that the case, it could be $1 million case, but it could be a $20 million case.
Yeah.
And are really leveraging that in terms of their negotiations. And I wish I had a good answer to that, because I think that the problem with those cases is that they are not necessarily going to be decided on the facts, but I think that it is the appeals to sympathy and all that, with respect to jurors, that makes it incredibly difficult to sort of understand, again, what the value of those cases are, and what I think is happening is that we're spending a tremendous amount of legal, because we have to. Because we're being made almost to litigate those cases right up to the courthouse steps.
Yeah.
Before they get settled. And so, I will use Bill Mitchell's name here and say that, and get your listeners to listen to some of what Bill Mitchell, lawyer out of Atlanta, has to say about that, because he has some very creative ideas in terms of understanding the value of a case and what you can do in what he would call a disruptive way, to get out of them early, and so but I think that's again, it's really not having a good grasp anymore, because of the way that verdicts have gone, of what exactly the value of a particular claim is, and therefore not really, being stuck in terms of really trying to get cases resolved.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that comes to mind too with counsel, it's outside or opposing counsel, is what I found in my experience. Like, sometimes you have really good counsel and you kind of know what to expect from them. Like you know that they're gonna this is how they're going to work up their file, and you kind of anticipate like this is what they're going to spend. They're going to put all the money in, and sometimes that's easier to predict and prepare for versus that counsel that just kind of like wants to fly the plane into the side of the mountain and like it like takes that very cavalier approach. And those are the ones that I find to be more dangerous because you kind of don't know what to expect sometimes. And I think, there's a lot more uncertainty there that it's hard to work with.
Right. Yeah, I think, again, I think that's always been, I think that there were, I'm just thinking about in terms of my own time in practice in Hartford, there were, 2 or 3 plaintiffs firms, maybe it probably were more than 2 or 3, but it's been a long time. There were 2 or 3 plaintiffs firms that you could trust, that, that when they said, something, you could take it to the bank. And that they weren't pushovers. I mean, they knew what they were doing. I know them because I had them on some of my claims for that auto manufacturer. And so, and they didn't take small claims. But then there were the sort of the ones that you described where basically, you didn't trust what they were saying, and everything had to be in writing, and this was, and so I think that's always been. I just think, again, I think that the values are such now that it's that it becomes that there's a lot more risk involved.
Yeah.
When you're especially when you're dealing, as with that attorney that really is just a little bit flying by the seat of their pants a little bit because they've got a sympathetic case, or they've got or a very bad injury case.
Yeah. I mean, I will not name names, but there's a particular attorney or firm that, I mean, I remember having a case that was not a super high value case, but it just it was not treated that way, but it was like, it was going to explode because they were pulling all the way random stops in order to like just blow up the case and just filing motions on nonsense things or filing motions against attorneys for nonsense things. And I remember talking to an associate, and he said, yeah, I mean, we don't care if it's a loser. We're going to make it a winner. But you didn't know it, but there was it was like the regular game wasn't there. It was trying to figure out what game they were playing and be like, okay, now I need to I need to figure out what game this is so I know, what my move should be.
Yes. Yeah. And that's hard. When the hardest thing, or one of the hardest things, I guess, is that when somebody's doing something that's completely irrational, and that it's, that you have one of those situations when you call up, your partner, or you call up or I would call up a lawyer and say, what am I missing here? Okay, they're doing this, and this case is, and what am I missing? And when you have that conversation, that you've got that problem.
You're like, am I the crazy one? Am I being gaslighted? Like, what's going on here? Well, Bob, I've kept you longer than I say I'm supposed to keep anybody, but I don't want to let you go until I ask you this. Because as you know, as a listener, I usually close up my podcast like this. If you were to, knowing what you know now through your career, what advice would you give your younger self?
I guess what I would say is that you have to love what you do, and there has to be a purpose there. I have these relationships with insureds that I absolutely, I just think that they are the best. And it became a problem for my children, actually, because there was a point in each of their growth where they would say to me, well, how do I get a job like yours? And I said, well, do you really want to be a lawyer? And they said, no, not that. But you wake up in the morning and you want to go to work. How do I get a job like that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, and so I would say that, if you're going to get into this business, then you have to be passionate about serving your insureds. You have to be passionate about protecting them, and sometimes protecting them means settling a case that they don't want to settle.
Yeah.
Developing a relationship with them that you can explain to them why it is that you did that, even though they didn't want to. Yeah, I think you have to love what you do.
Yeah.
And if you don't love what you do, you find something else. Sort of in keeping with what we've said up to now is that you have to find people that you can work with who you trust, whether that be internally in your company, or whether it be externally in terms of the lawyers that you hire. And you have to find and you have to develop those relationships. And that takes time, and it takes honesty. Because when you're unhappy with somebody's performance, you have to be able to tell them that in such a way as to in a constructive fashion. And then I think also, and the same thing goes for the clients. I mean, insurers, and I recognize that every carrier is not, the Hartford didn't have the program that the Hartford had. But I think that to the extent that you can develop that relationship with your insureds, that those are things which inure not only to your benefit, but the benefit of the company, because there are insureds that are going to stay with your company because of the relationship they have with you, and sometimes in spite of the price. So I think that developing all of those relationships is and making sure that you're on a good footing in all those situations. I think that's the best recipe for success.
Yeah. And to add also to know that it takes time, it doesn't happen overnight. Relationships and trust just don't happen at a drop of a hat. They take time. And I think that's something that I think frustrating, or for some people to grasp, because you want like immediate, there's a lot of want for immediate gratification or and patience is a virtue, right?
Right.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm honored to have you as a guest. After being a listener for so long, the honor is mine to have you on. So I appreciate you taking the time to join me. Hopefully my landscaping noise was not too loud. They were right up by my window for a good portion of this. I didn't know there were that many leaves there, but apparently there were. But of course, for our listeners out there, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to the Defense Never Rests. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, and you can also find us at TDNR Podcast on YouTube.